Madam Chair, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for having the opportunity again to introduce the protection segment of this Executive Committee. In the interest of time, I'm not going to read my very long statement, but we will make the longer version available to you. I would like to focus on a couple of reflections that reveal some concerning recent trends, but also show some of the positive developments that have helped to counter them. First, we need to go back to and forward with the essence of international protection. There has been an unfortunate tendency in several countries around the world where this essence of international protection has been moved away from. None of us should ever assume that what happens to refugees could not happen to us. Providing sanctuary to people who flee for their lives and freedoms is not only noble and honorable, but it is eminently practical. Providing protection and hope for the future does not take anything away. If properly managed, it adds and enriches. Sometimes this gets forgotten in the media chatter and in the political discourse, which quite frankly, from our perspective, we often find quite myopic, especially when ideologies obscure the realities of human beings in distress. What seems to get lost in this debate are the historical perspectives and the recognition that the rule of law is essential to good governance and the protection of people. We need to remember why international protection was conceived in the first place, how it has evolved. We need to consider what it means both in today's world and in the future, including in future threats such as climate change. In doing so, we can and must make the case for protection again and again. I'm saying this against the backdrop of some egregious violations of international refugee law over the last year. They are wide-ranging and they have occurred in all parts of the world. They included killings of refugees by the military in one country, but also some very serious incidents of forced return, of refoulement, in different parts of the world. Denial of entry to people whose very lives depended on flight. Pushbacks, entrapment of refugees in dangerous and horrific conditions near border areas. Terrified families have been deported in the middle of the night, often with the collusion of agents of the country of origin. Individuals have been extradited in contravention with fundamental legal principles, and the list goes on. It is profoundly disturbing that the core of the core, the principle of non-refoulement, is observed in its breach rather than its compliance. Granting asylum and protecting refugees, and it has to be said, that's what the Convention says, is a humanitarian, non-political act. It does not pass judgment about conditions in the country of origin. It focuses on the plight and on the needs of the individual. And it must not be used to create tensions between states. It should not be levied to forward populist agendas. Yet, a trend has emerged where some in leadership positions cast aside this deep humanitarian, religious and legal tradition in favor of short-term political gains. They argue that they act in defense of liberty, of security and safety of their own citizens. This is dangerous, not just for refugees, but also for the citizens in whose defense they purport to act. Asylum and refugee protection are not things thrown easily to the wind. They represent, and we have heard it from the High Commissioner, from Madam Chair, they represent humanity at its best. We have also witnessed a trend where some non-governmental organizations, human rights defenders, humanitarian actors, and national human rights institutions have had their work curtailed. No one should denigrate the courageous work of civil society in advancing the cause of caring and protecting and saving lives, both on land and at sea. Another major worry remains the array of deterrence measures. In some instances, these have become deliberate policies of cruel, inhuman, and degrading treatment. They have been directed against the people who fled such treatment in the first place. There is no justification for keeping families apart. It is inhumane to keep refugees in limbo, languishing in substandard detention sites offshore, in inappropriate reception facilities, or confined to border areas. Treating human beings in this way ultimately affects everyone. It can and it has led to the dehumanization of individuals and the brutalization of a society as a whole. One deterrence measure that we have seen in particular is around detention, which continues in a number of countries, detention of asylum seekers and refugees, and we have done reports on detention in about 25 countries, demonstrating the profoundly negative impact it has on the mental and physical well-being of people. We will therefore vigorously pursue our global strategy beyond detention because we know that alternatives are possible, practical, and cost-effective. And we have made some progress in a number of countries. In Thailand, for example, in Malaysia, in the United Kingdom, we have seen a decrease in the detention of children. And in one country, Lithuania, in fact, this practice has ended. Sexual and gender-based violence remains a top concern for us. It takes many forms: rape, sexual assault, domestic violence, child marriage, sexual exploitation, and others. But what all of these have in common is the lasting sting of humiliation, disempowerment, and subjugation. We have made good progress, particularly with the Safe from the Start initiative and the call to action. But we have challenges that remain. There's no doubt about this. We have embarked on a 3-year action plan to ensure that the SGBV response and mitigation strategies and the prevention strategies are mainstreamed into all our areas of work, and you have heard this from the High Commissioner as well. Children on the move is another major topic. We had a very good High Commissioner's dialogue last year, which focused on the subject, and we have seen very robust follow-up on this topic. We know that it poses many challenges to states. But what we took away from the dialogue last year was a statement from the Swedish State Secretary who said that these challenges can be turned into an opportunity. She said that strengthening national child protection systems were the result of their engagement with refugee children. It's a very important message to take away from while we do whatever we can on the operational follow-up in that respect. We have had many discussions with you also about asylum systems and about the refugee status determination process. And we know that we all face together growing challenges because of high numbers, but also because of people seeking, who actually seek a migratory status, who resort to the asylum process. This is part of, if you like, the asylum migration interface that we have been talking about. Often because no other legal pathways are available. So we have high hopes with the Global Compact on Migration to make migratory pathways available to the majority of people who move on irregularly. Last year, UNHCR itself received over 200,000 applications in over 60 countries. In the face of such numbers, we have learned well that the RSD procedure needs to be kept simple, fair, and efficient. It requires investment in good quality first instance decision-making and a good independent second instance body. Also, the use of simplified and streamlined case processing will help keep the numbers manageable and maintain the quality. That's really important because we have many discussions where the sophistication and over-sophistication of systems sometimes takes us away from the actual result that we want to achieve, which means identifying those who are in need of international protection. We know that state engagement is absolutely crucial, and we hope that in the context of the comprehensive refugee response framework, we are also going to enhance the engagement of states. And we have seen some very positive developments in countries like Thailand, Cameroon, Morocco, and Turkey. It's clear within this turbulence, the best way to steer the course is to stick to the core, the essence of protection, to remind ourselves why it was created in the first place, and to learn how to customize it in today's world. Second, there is a much broader governance issue at stake. We have seen how much of the current debate and the polemics around refugees can undermine good governance. There is language that vilifies refugees, that scapegoats them. There's sometimes exaggerated reporting about hordes of people streaming across borders. Refugees are called queue jumpers to create the image that there is a queue. They are sometimes called correct or incorrect refugees, as if there is a justification to treat them differently. Or they are branded as terrorists or criminals. Worse, they are blamed for their plight and punished for moving onward trying to survive. In pre-election periods, migration and refugee issues have served as a convenient topic around which to whip up fears and gain political capital. Preconceived ideas, identity politics, and a tendency towards exclusion are enmeshed in this debate. It is a way to channel anger and frustrations. And quite frankly, it's the old trick of clouding the conscience, of divide and rule, and of a reductionist view of identity. Such tactics pose particular challenges to good governance, because we need good governance in the refugee protection arena, because it means nurturing, understanding a reasonable environment upon which the essence of international protection ultimately depends. And to be quite self-critical, I think we in the humanitarian and the human rights world, we tend to speak to the converted. It's our comfort zone. And yet our greatest challenge is to engage with those who do not agree, who have strong emotions, who revert to fixed ideas about identity in a fast-changing world. We need to engage in this listening exercise. We need to understand the fears, and we need to find ways to replace these emotions with empathy and the desire for inclusion. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done. We have made some progress, especially in countries in the Middle East, in North Africa, in Europe and elsewhere, to include refugees, internally displaced, with host communities in joint projects. But a lot more needs to be done on that front. There is also, if you like, an advantage in broadening the coalition of support for refugees. The whole of society approach that was mentioned is reflected in the New York Declaration. And we have seen the engagement with the Olympic International Committee, with universities, with faith groups, with workers' unions, with youth groups, with the private sector, with a very strong statement from the vice chair of the International Chamber of Commerce. We see in Bangladesh how the volunteers come forward and provide the first line of support. There are thousands of community initiatives in Europe, in the Americas, by cities, by mayors, that also see the advantage of refugee integration and migration, and to revitalize their workforce. Countless individuals who on a daily basis, mentor and assist refugees, sponsor their resettlement and support solutions. The World Bank engagement, very significant, as the High Commissioner said, by allocating substantial resources to host communities and host countries with limited resources that are particularly affected. In all of this, the question of language is key, because it has become, unfortunately, common in current debates to muddle language and terminology at the expense of refugees. We have heard too often refugees described as something other than who they are. For instance, they have been called undocumented people or vulnerable migrants. This may have been done with the laudable intention of making a stronger case for the rights of all people on the move. However, this has had not the intended effect. Instead, it has created confusion. Rather than advancing the cause of protecting migrants' rights, it has provided fodder for those who wish to undermine the rights of refugees. Quite apart from the erroneous legal depiction, it is inappropriate to present refugees as a subset of anyone else, migrants or otherwise. A person who is a refugee, full stop. There's a clear legal definition, there are clear accountabilities for ensuring their protection. And the essence of protection lies in identifying and recognizing protection needs of people who flee conflict, who flee violence, who flee human rights abuses, and other serious predicaments in their country of origin. There is, of course, a clear human rights basis, as the representative from the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights has been saying, for the rights of migrants. But there is no internationally agreed definition of who is a migrant at this stage in international law. We must be mindful of the rights and the needs of migrants because of what they encounter along the route. And we are very much aware of the same dangers that they face with refugees, as well as their particular circumstances. And as a result, we updated in December last year our 10-point plan on the asylum migration nexus. It would be a huge and costly mistake to be unclear about definitions, because blurring the distinction feeds into justifications for restrictive measures towards refugees. If we are not careful about this, we are somehow losing the very thing that we are trying to achieve. The problematic use of language, we also see this sometimes in unwarranted juxtapositions between broader security concerns and refugee arrivals. But let us recall that refugees are often the first and multiple victims of terrorism and insecurity. Our collective experience has taught us that security and protection need to go hand in hand. International refugee law provides for safeguards to identify protection needs, but it also bears in mind the security interests of host countries and their communities. There is, of course, no system that is entirely risk-free, but asylum procedures are amongst the most carefully scrutinized channels for gaining admission and stay in a country. This applies equally to resettlement, where security checks and rigorous screening mechanisms are applied even before a refugee is permitted to enter the country. With regard to resettlement, just one very clear message from our side: let's not forget that resettlement is a protection tool. It's life-saving. Sometimes in current discussions, I have to say, there are other considerations that come into play, such as integration potential, which we view with great concern. Third, and it's my last reflection, we must find ways to break the cycle of displacement. This goes into addressing the immediate humanitarian, but also the longer-term development needs. It is actually about a broader understanding of solutions, which includes addressing root causes, of course, the immediate needs and longer-term development. Ideally, of course, it means preventing the problems from arising in the first place by addressing the drivers of displacement. A lot has to do with good governance, the effective functioning of the state everywhere on the territory. In too many situations, we are confronted with huge inequalities, a lack of accountability towards people, and massive and unchecked exploitation of natural resources at the expense of local populations. In an increasingly interconnected world, these issues are not isolated, but implicate and affect us all. We know that in different parts of the world, especially remote areas, zones are often neglected and marginalized for decades. And it is no wonder that these zones then become the breeding grounds for discontent, radicalization, and violence, which can lead to displacement. Displacement is a lifeline for survival, but in too many situations, it is also used as a deliberate strategy by those exercising power to exert control. Displacement denies, it deprives, it uproots. It sets in motion a process of impoverishment if not addressed vigorously. The reversal of this process can, however, be a catalyst for development and change, as well as an investment in the future of the countries affected by it. That's the promise from last year's New York Declaration. And we have done a lot of work around self-reliance. It was mentioned also in the statement of the International Labour Organization. We have in fact developed a joint action plan on the issue of access to non-exploitative employment, the possibility for refugees to start businesses, the financial inclusion issue. The same on education, and I won't go into all the details of it, but suffice it to say that on the education front we have very high hopes that the development side will help us ensure the promise of the Sustainable Development Goal 4, which means to include also refugees and displaced people. The same on return. We know that on the return side, traditional voluntary repatriation operations are rare these days. There are situations where refugees, as the High Commissioner said in his opening, return in less than ideal circumstances. And we have raised protection concerns about this vigorously. However, if individuals wish to return home before circumstances are conducive, they have the right to do so. It is our responsibility to make every effort to ensure that their decision is free and informed, and that they can access the essential support they need upon arrival in their home country. Internal displacement. I think there was already a discussion also during the general debate. Just 2 points. The interconnection between internal and external displacement is very important for us, and we will look forward very much to the IDP Guiding Principles 20th anniversary next year, and the 10th anniversary of the Kampala Convention in 2019, because we see this as an opportunity to pursue the implementation of these standards in law, policy, and action. Then there are the millions of stateless people. It's perhaps one of the most tragic and absurd consequences of failed governance to have statelessness still exist in the 21st century. And this has been most recently demonstrated by the violence and the grave abuses that have driven more than 500,000 Rohingya to seek refuge in Bangladesh. We have made progress in a number of areas. Over 100,000 formerly stateless people got nationality over the last 2 years. Thailand has endorsed a goal to eradicate statelessness by 2024. Kenya has just resolved the protracted statelessness situation of the Makonde. Madagascar and Sierra Leone have changed their nationality laws to ensure gender equality. And we have seen a rise in state parties to both conventions. ECOWAS is the first region to have adopted a legally binding regional action plan to eradicate statelessness within the next couple of years. Again, extremely important, and one that we want to pursue. And we have established good partnerships with non-governmental organizations, with UNICEF, as well as with the World Bank, to look towards the implementation of Sustainable Development Goal 16.9, which is about legal identity for all. And we very much hope for your support for the high-level event that we want to hold in 2019 about statelessness. It's halfway through our global campaign. In conclusion, Madam Chair, we know that sustained engagement is needed. Our work on next year's Global Compact on Refugees will help to sustain this much-needed interest. As the High Commissioner said, the Global Compact on Refugees will be a consensus document. And please rest assured, it will be closely developed with you all during our formal consultations in the first half of 2018. The aim is that you are comfortable with the final text, so that you are able to own and support fully the text that the High Commissioner submits to the General Assembly in 2018. The zero draft, which we will share with you early next year for your review, will be based on the outcomes of the informal thematic consultations that we are going to hold over the next couple of months, the High Commissioner's dialogue at the end of the year, and many other discussions that we held this year, as well as, most importantly, of course, the practical application of the CRF and many good practices gathered from other refugee operations. It is our deepest hope that the Global Compact will broaden our support base, will build new and reinforce old partnerships, that it will encourage stronger commitments to resettlement and complementary pathways, and that it will enable us to establish greater predictability and invest in the future of countries by strengthening both the resilience of host communities and refugees. We know this is a tall order, but it is achievable if we work on it together and constructively. Ultimately, the Global Compact will enable us to strengthen international protection, its essence, good governance, and the search for solutions. Thank you very much.